part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Scott Sabol.
And I'm John Sabol.
Our guest on the podcast today is John Ryan. Now, you might not have heard of this gentleman, but maybe you've heard of his betting website, predictiveplaybook.com. It's gained a lot of traction recently, here in the Ohio Valley and New England and around the country. And what John Ryan is doing and what he's offering is quite different than what you hear on many of the TV and social media betting ads. Here to explain his background, and yes, and I like this about him, he's very good with numbers, and his very interesting life story is owner and developer John Ryan. John, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's quite an honor to be with you guys and looking forward to it.
Well, before we get to what you're doing in the present, take us back. We're going to go back to the 1980s. You were involved with predicting markets, trades, Federal Reserve decisions, taking those decisions and using them in predicting markets, and a lot of that excitement back in the 1980s, just all that stuff that's really kind of cool. All these movies have been done about it. Take us back to that and what you were doing specifically and how that led to what you're doing now.
Yeah, thanks. Back then, we were starting to build some price pattern recognition systems. I was blessed to have a great job on Wall Street at various places. The one I'm talking about was I was reporting to a chief economist, which was quite a great thing. I was like a sponge with this gentleman, and he mentored me, and I was blessed to have him as a boss. But we started with an idea that if we could take the idea of a yen or the name of a commodity or the name of a stock out of the selection process and match it up against a price pattern, regardless if it was soybeans or whether it was crude oil or whether it was Apple Computer or whatever, that we would gain some intelligence on what was going to happen next. It was always what's next. These numbers come out from the economy every single week. Well, that's fine and dandy, but that's history. It's a history lesson of what has already happened. It's not giving you a predictive flavor for what prices are going to do moving forward. So we started working with that, and lo and behold, we came up with some pretty cool models that worked. And we were on the institutional side, so I didn't do any of the retail. So anybody had asked me, is the Wolf of Wall Street true? I always said, well, no, I have no clue, first of all. And second of all, I wouldn't want to be part of that, to tell you the truth. So working with institutions, we really had a lot of input back from them. And that was a time where, in my young career, I was learning that, sometimes you think you have a great idea, but then it gets even better if you just keep your ears open and listen to what people are giving to you in feedback. So then in the 90s, that led to neural networks. And I did one of those. And, back in that day, and you guys are probably right around that cusp, with all due respect, maybe, when you went to the CFO and gave an idea to them and then the board of directors and they approved it, it wasn't like you had a team of project managers in place to manage your project and make sure it got done. You were hands-on and had to do it yourself. And that's kind of how I've been all my life as a result. So that neural network then became a really great model. It really helped a lot of institutions. We did a lot of yield curve arbitrage, a lot of currency hedging. It was just an absolute blast to be part of that. So at the one point where this dovetails into the sports betting realm is I was in charge of our crude oil operations during the late 90s. And I always had a Friday afternoon meeting, and then some of us after that would adjourn and go have a few beers. And one of the traders, who happened to be one of our best traders, came up to me and said, John, if we take those neural networks and apply them to sports, we will make a bloody fortune. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? You are completely out of your mind. There's nothing to be gained by doing sports betting. And second of all, it's a coin flip. I said, you're nuts. Let's just stick with this. But over time, he got me to develop a small database, and then you had the eureka moment. And, the lights went on and I was like, holy mackerel, this actually does work. Taking it one step further, I started researching the industry, which was extraordinarily shady, to say the least. Shows on Saturday mornings, I could not believe that a human being would listen to these people and then actually pay for their advice. That this is the game of the millennium, the game of the year. You're going to be able to buy your girlfriend the biggest diamond ring she's ever seen after you win this game because of us. And it just made me think that, you know what, maybe I can do a little hobby here and teach people an ethical way of doing this. And I thought, well, I'll do this for a couple years. Well, this ran parallel for a very long period of time. And then with the wave of sports betting, I went at it full time. So that's kind of the overview, but there's a lot of stuff in between too, as you guys know.
When you had that idea, when your coworker told you about applying it to sports betting, did you have any betting experience before that at all?
None. In the mid 90s, betting was taboo. It was illegal. It just wasn't something that, anybody with any type of Wall Street career really did, or at least if they did, it wasn't, talked about. It was very behind the scenes. Of course, we all know as adults that, that did occur, and illegal betting was going on for many decades, even, before any of us were even born. So it really was a subject that I just had no interest in. I was doing well enough with the commodities, the currencies. I had plenty of stuff to do. I had plenty of work to do, let alone focus on some coin flip of an opportunity to bet on a Sunday afternoon watching an NFL game. But then, it kind of, became a path in my life, even though I didn't realize it. In the tail end of, I was living 2 blocks from the towers at this time. This is 1997 up to 2000. So in December of 2000, and about 4 months prior to that, I had a very, very bad cough. It would hit me, and then I'd be uncontrollable. It was a bad hack, and it was, in the public, it was actually starting to get a little embarrassing. But then I came down with this pneumonia that was very severe. And before I was taken to the hospital, I literally could go about, from downstairs to upstairs, and I'd be gasping for breath. And this is coming out of the mouth of a former All-American. So it was pretty scary. And then got to the hospital, found out I had a rare strain of pneumonia that was in every single quadrant of my lungs. And, it seemed like a mess, but it was going to go away. So while I was in the hospital, they were, taking all kinds of tests. I mean, they even took a bone marrow biopsy with those big needles. I'm a guy. I'm in denial. I'm like thinking like, this is no big deal. They're just ruling it out, and could care less, really. Do what you need to do. I'll get out of here. I'll get back to my job, and that's it. So then when they were going to dismiss me is when I got the news, and it was December 12th of 2000 at 5:45 p.m. because the first thing I did after I was told that I was in a grave condition is I looked at the clock because they had informed me that I didn't have much time left. And when you're 38 years old, at the peak of your career, young family, it's like the worst nightmare you can ever imagine. And granted, there's worse nightmares that people go through, and I'm not trying to say mine's better than anybody else's. It's just, for me, this was more than having your face ripped off by real news. Mm-hmm. So after that, I basically went 2 days of some severe depression, and I just share this because that's what I think a lot of people go through when they're told they have a terminal illness, whether it's cancer or something else. And I actually did. I'll humbly admit, I'm not ashamed of it. I actually did plan out that I wasn't going to have my family burdened with this, and I was going to, find a way to get up into Canada, and that was going to be it, and get eaten by a bear or something. And I just didn't want to burden the family at all. And you're not thinking right. You really are not thinking clearly. You're not thinking about what the pain of that action would do to your family members, even though you think you're saving them the pain of what you're about to go through. I just couldn't bear the thought of, those last final days, with my family surrounding me. And basically I was told, they may not be able to touch me because my bones would be so fragile that they could snap. And it kind of freaked me out. So then, about the third day, I think it was third or fourth day, I snapped out of it, and I was like, John, you know what? If you're going to go to heaven or wherever you're going to go, I'm going kicking and screaming, and I'm going out guns a-blazing with everything I have to try to beat this. So I began to research it on what was, the beginning of the internet, really. And I've met this doctor. He was, I won't mention his name, but he was from a Southern university. And it was funny because I kept getting links to him. And I couldn't imagine myself going to a Southern state to get something done. It was just like a bad mindset I had in my mind. I wanted to go, to a guy that had a, Harvard degree and was top in his class or whatever, right? But this guy was really, I would say, the godfather of multiple myeloma, which is the cancer I had. And it ended up coming full circle later on in this journey. So I mentioned that only because you think when you're researching that might be the wrong choice, but it ends up being that it could have been a really great choice. And it's only because of bias. So bias, I just threw out the window, from that point on in my life. It was one of the lessons I learned. But anyway, I interviewed at a couple different hospitals, so to speak. I interviewed them. But then when I was at Hopkins, my bone marrow was up around 90% of this plasma, which is it's a cancer of the immune system, essentially. And you get filled up with too much plasma in your bone marrow. It crowds out the reds. It makes you fatigued. It makes you prone to pneumonias and all kinds of other illnesses. And they wouldn't even let me go until they could verify that I could get a dose of Decadron, which is a very high-powered drug, to make sure that I wasn't going to have any type of catastrophic event between Baltimore and my home. So that's when it really set in, the reality of what I was facing. Fortunately, everything got, I was okay. Obviously, I'm still here. But then we started chemo treatments, which were 96 hours continuous with 3 different chemos. It looked like orange Gatorade, and that's what the kids called it when they came to visit. And, having that analogy, Gatorade is a health thing for athletes. I was an athlete. And just having the visual of orange, I remember really being like almost a positive thing. It wasn't some kind of mysterious chemical going into my body that, was destroying, God knows what. So I remember that part of it too. There was a tremendous roller coaster. The first dose worked really, really well. And it was pandemonium, really. It was like, oh my goodness, it's come down that much. But then it was almost like it got mad for me disturbing it and giving it chemicals that was really irritating the daylights out of it. And it went skyrocketing back up to really severe levels. So then we got on this drug called thalidomide, which was a drug back in the 50s. It was used for morning sickness, but it created birth defects. So it was, just eliminated from the FDA. You couldn't take it. So my generation, people that have the very short arms, they're part of the birth defects more than likely from thalidomide back in the 50s and the 60s. But somehow they found out that this drug was going to help with multiple myeloma patients. And for me, this was at a time where it was off-label. So I was taking the maximum dose allowed by the FDA, which I remember being 1,600 milligrams. And the bad part about this was that I was told that I was never going to play the piano again. I learned piano when I was 7. I still play to this day. But, sitting there at Hopkins and being told that when there was a beautiful baby grand right in the atrium of the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center that I wanted to play, that was almost as bad as being told I had 6 to 12 months to live. But there was no choice to be made. You had to listen to the doctors and get on with it. But that actually is what saved my life, I think. Got me stable. The big ups and downs from 85%, 90% plasma in the bone marrow to 20% were waning. But the key was to get it stable. It had to be stable for several months. So come the fall of 2001, and this is after 9/11, obviously, and that was one of the blessings of cancer, of getting it, was that it got me away from being 2 blocks from the towers. And I do count that as a blessing. That was just an incredibly bad day for all of us. So in November of 2001, they harvested my stem cells and froze them. I don't know if it's a freezer or what, but it's frozen at Kelvin. And I didn't even know what Kelvin was, but it's a very, very cold temperature, very extremely cold. Then I'm literally, I'm back up here, and I'm sorry I'm going back and forth here. It's hard to get everything like together. But when I was getting those 96 hours of chemo, it was me, and everybody's different when they deal with cancer. I had to use my athletic background to try to train for this thing and beat it. So when I was getting the chemo, I actually had an exercise bike brought into my room, and I'd be riding the bike as much as I possibly could to keep my physical condition as strong as possible. Then I decided I was going to keep bowling. And during the winter months, I really enjoyed bowling. I liked playing golf. And wouldn't you know it, in middle of December, I threw a 300 game. And I had done it before, but I had never done it with this. And I was very weak. Well, not very weak, but I was much weaker than I was previous to the cancer. And I had to change the whole style of how I bowled. But I just was having fun and wanted to compete. And a lot of people have to give up everything when they're diagnosed with cancer and focus only on that. For me, I wanted to keep life going as I knew it. So that happened. And then the very next day, I got the call from Hopkins saying, it's time. And they were very scientific, very specific. It was December 16th. There's no like, oh, wait a minute, Christmas is coming up and New Year's. Can I do it in the end of January? I just want to spend my time with the family. No, it wasn't like that. It was very urgent, and it didn't matter to any of us in the family or me. So the next day, I'm running through my head that, oh my God, I'm going to go do this transplant. I'm going to die. And everybody's last memory of me was bowling the 300 game the last time they saw me. I'd much rather had bowled like a 120. So that didn't stick out. It was too surreal to me that happened. And then all of a sudden I'm getting the transplant. But the transplant is very difficult. It's 8 days of continuous chemo at very high doses. It's now called a stem cell rescue because if you don't have the stem cells, it would kill you. You wouldn't. The body would not be able to regenerate itself in order for you to live. But you're not scared of. At least I was not scared of dying from the chemo or that kind of treatment. But they take all your white cells out. They take basically all your platelets out down to about 50,000. Where, believe me, you don't have any hair to begin with. But if you shaved and nicked your cheek, you had the potential to bleed out. That's how many platelets you had. But sitting there, with no white count, and you're in a special room where, a sneeze from somebody could basically kill you. So Hopkins and all these other places are very careful and make sure that doesn't happen. Obviously, family cannot come visit you. And I was thankful for that, actually, because that was a period of time that was very difficult. And I'm not sure if I would have had the energy or the mindset to spend time with family and try to act like nothing's going on. The day of the stem cell going back in was 12/27. So my personal email is JRM 1227, and the 1227 is symbolic, obviously. So on that day, the doctors, and believe me, there was about a dozen of them that were, in charge of everybody's health on the bone marrow transplant floor at Hopkins. They sang happy birthday to me and gave me a new birth certificate because they're basically giving you a new immune system because that's the whole idea with the transplant is to eradicate everything and then have the stem cells rebuild. And to this day, they don't know, the doctors don't know why a stem cell knows to go, oh, gee, we need to create cells for this guy's eye or this guy's eyebrow or this guy's liver or this guy's skin. But they do. And I always imagined the stem cell going in there and basically at the end of a big forest fire where it's all black and everything's charred. that these stem cells then go in and help repopulate the forest. And that's kind of how I looked at it. But I have to tell you this too, because of our sports connection too. When the doctor brought up the stem cells, he looked like a guy selling hot dogs at a baseball game. A big container, and it was actually kind of fun. He brought them out, and then he's bringing them up to room temperature. And as I said, they store these things at Kelvin. So it was crackling like he was making me, bacon and eggs, and this was going to, be my breakfast. I mean, that's what it sounded like. So they don't use a machine like you would imagine, when you get drugs intravenous into you. It's just by gravity. So they literally take your stem cells that are in all these bags, hang them on a pole, and it goes into a port on your chest. And you just kind of sit there, and, people the doctors talk to you, and that's when the birthday thing happened. But then they when it's all done, they leave, and there you are. And then it becomes the waiting game. And the waiting game is pretty tough because you're hoping that it takes, you're hoping that it works, you're hoping that you don't have any severe graft versus host disease that makes you unbelievably sick. And then you're at a time where you're just in thought with yourself.
Yeah.
And, a lot of powerful things can go through your head during periods of time like that. And it has shaped how I try to live my life every day now. So,
John, let me jump in here real quick.
Sure.
I know Scott has kind of maybe briefly told you this during our emails back and forth, but what you're describing to us and to our listeners is something that Scott and I know quite a bit about, because our mom was diagnosed with multiple myeloma back in 2010, and she went through the exact same treatment that you went through now at 22, 23 years ago. And, we remember going through this whole setup, what the stem cell transplant was going to be like, the recovery, the whole procedure, and what it took and all that stuff. She had it done at the Cleveland Clinic. Before we get into your recovery with this, just to give some context here, for our mother, that stem cell transplant took, and now she's been 13 years since, and everything's been going well. And obviously you are here with us today in 2023, and it looks like everything went well for you in your recovery and with your stem cell transplant. And still, I know you're still dealing with multiple myeloma, but on a completely different stage, I would assume, versus what you were like 20 some years ago.
That's true. And congratulations to your mother, of course. Mm-hmm. There's not too many people I know right now that have made it 10 years. Geraldine Ferraro, the vice presidential candidate, made it that far. But that was back a ways now. She passed away of this disease, unfortunately, in 2011. Mm-hmm. But that is a very good thing. I am medically cured by 2 major hospitals on the East Coast of this incurable form of cancer. As I said, I did an autologous stem cell because I was trying to buy time. I wanted to see all my kids go to kindergarten. And that was what my goal was initially. It wasn't like it is now, where I just saw my son get married and now I'm going to be a grandfather. And that's the part of like real life that really hits you. And it is emotional. Like at Christmas time, I cannot do a family prayer without breaking down and somebody else having to finish it. And it becomes kind of a joke. Everybody's nice about it, but it the power of it, and I'm sure you know the same thing with the experiences with your mother, of just having her around has to be just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought too that this kind of process is so much harder on the family and the loved ones than it is the patient. Because there's nothing really you guys can do for her. There was nothing really, other than, verbal support. You're going to beat this. We're here for you, whatever you need, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the patient's battle with all the support behind it. And it's, I'm totally convinced it's much harder on the loved ones and the family members than the patient.
Yeah. That echoes kind of like what we went through with our mom, and, she's still with us, hopefully, for many more years to come, but she's on year 13, Scott, now? Is it going on 13? So
that's incredible.
It really is. And she's had a lot of the same procedures that you had done as well. How much? So talk us through this part of this, John. You went through that entire health issues. Actually, that's congratulations that you're medically clear or cured. By the way, that is awesome news. Then, how did that parlay into your perspective on like wanting to help people with sports betting? Because here in Ohio, it became legal January 1st of this past year, and it has blown up here. People love doing it, and it's not taboo anymore. Major league or professional sports teams embrace it too. Some have sports books in their arenas or right outside their arena or stadium. The entire realm of betting has changed. How did the cancer then impact your ability to help people in betting? Walk us through that.
Well, once I realized I was going to live for at least a couple years, the need to give back was huge. I knew I wasn't going back to Wall Street because I was already basically disqualified because of the chemo. Fiduciary responsibility would never hire somebody that went through the chemo to be responsible for, literally billions of dollars. And that was fine with me. I was okay letting that go because the need to give back to individually basically was huge. And I wanted more people to have the gift of me having a couple years. At that point, I thought, a couple years, this is magic. So I got involved with, and I've never done anything on a small scale in my life. It's always had to be, all in or not. And advocacy down in Washington, D.C. was the perfect fit. And what that was, a group from the Mobile Myeloma Research Foundation and the Lymphoma Society, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, joined forces and put together meetings with senators and representatives, and they were with the senators. They weren't staffers, and no disrespect to them, but you were actually set up to meet with the senator who really has the say at the end of the day. So the first year I go down there and it's very positive. You felt like you were making a difference by talking to these people that do have the power to, move money around so that there's more research dollars, so that it helps more people, hopefully increase the longevity of getting this type of cancer and all the blood cancers. Then the second year I was asked to be the lead for the Pennsylvania Coalition, which I, immediately accepted. And my job then was to introduce the start of the meeting, tell the senator why we were there, and the ask that we were hopefully going to achieve, one of which was the Geraldine Ferraro Cancer Education and Awareness Act, which by itself was proved 100%. The only standalone bill since then, I guess over the last 40 years, be not connected to something else. And that was truly a great moment for her. And you can't say enough about that woman and what she did for, even human rights back in the beginning of the 90s and the cancer research and breast cancer awareness. She was a tremendous woman. Again, a blessing that was given to me because I would have never met her had I not had this. I would have never met Ted Kennedy. I would have never met so many other powerful people that actually are human beings. And I think we forget sometimes that they are human beings. They do have the same types of problems we have. But when you combine forces and you have a common goal, it's amazing what can be achieved. So with the advocacy was huge for me because then I started being asked to visit with families. And I remember too, and this is a key point, I think, when I would visit a family, I could almost tell you what was going to happen, only because if the family was afraid to say cancer, our uncle Joe has cancer. He has multiple myeloma. And they would instead say, Uncle Joe has the C word. What are we going to do? Then I would just flat out tell him, look, you have cancer. You're not flawed. This is not something that makes you, irrelevant to society. You just happen to have a disease called cancer, and it doesn't make you even less important or flawed was the word I always used. So don't be afraid to say that, cancer, I have cancer, I have this, I have that, but I'm doing this to defeat the cancer. And I think once people grabbed a hold of that idea, it was easier to think about, defeating the opponent. So that really gave me a lot of self-worth, to tell you the truth, because I felt like I was making a difference that way. And then the game of baseball. My oldest boy got involved with baseball. I was not an All-American in baseball, but I read when I want to learn. And I read everything under the planet to be able to teach him the game of baseball in the modern era. So I immediately learned and saw the opportunity to teach 12 to 18-year-old young boys, teenagers, some life lessons. And one of them is that, baseball, you fail 70% of the time and you're in the Hall of Fame. So, that idea of that it's okay to fail. And I always remember the founder of Honda. He was asked, what do you attribute your success to? And he said, well, I failed 99% of the time. And I'll never forget that, because that sticks with me about, life in general. You have to fail, you have to learn, and then you take it from there. So baseball was huge. I did an awful lot of teams, some national championship teams. And again, I got back something from it too. It wasn't me just giving. I was doing it because it was a two-way street. So that was, basically up to about 2010. Then I went back into the corporate world, worked for a life science company that had heard about me and my story, Wall Street background, clinical trials. So I was in charge of doing financial analysis on life science companies and tying it into clinical trials. And that was a blast. But then I saw the wave of sports betting coming and legalizing it. And I thought, you know what? This might be it, because there's going to be a lot of people out there that are going to think that, oh, wow, this is going to be great. And it's a 50-50 probability. Why would I even need the Powerball anymore? Because I'll make a nice little living with this, and we'll do vacations and we'll go to Europe and whatever. And I that's not reality with sports betting. It has to be small amounts. I always refer to on the show, bet with your head, never over it. And may all the wins be yours. That's how I end every single show. But pizza money bets, there's nothing wrong with saying I bet $20 and I lost, or $20 and I won. That's where it becomes fun, because you're adding a little bit of entertainment value to the game. Mm-hmm. Tonight the Phillies are playing at home against the Atlanta Braves, the dreaded Atlanta Braves, with all due respect to people who live in Atlanta. But, my wife and I might put a little money on that, just to say that we did $10 or $20 on the Phillies because we want to see them win tonight. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. And, if anybody ever makes a bet and all of a sudden you make the bet and the first thought is, oh, my God, I hope this wins, you just bet too much. And that's kind of one of my missions with this, is that there's an addictive behavior with this, and there's a danger with it. And I saw it with, commodities, where guys would come in with several $100,000 that they earned, and they thought they could be a local trader down the pits, and they would get literally blown up in a couple of weeks. The same thing can happen in sports betting, unfortunately. And there's a real reality with the dangers of it. So I try to preach that instead of saying, you know what, I really love this play and I think it's going to win, and sure, maybe go for it a little bit. I don't like that at all, because that just leads to bad things down the road. Even if you win it makes you feel more invincible, that, hey, I got this. I understand how to bet. If you're not doing this for a long period of time, I can tell you right now, you don't know what you're doing. And you need to have the experience of several losses in a row, and then analyze, why did I lose? Much like I did with the markets. My first big trade in the markets, and the guy was an elder trader, probably in his 60s, and I'm sitting there at 25. General Foods. So I'm learning about options, and General Foods was on the radar for a takeover. So I put I think $2,000 into options, and lo and behold, a day or two later, they get bought out. I make a $38,000 profit. And I think that I know everything there is to know about everything on Wall Street. And that $38,000 gain was lost very quickly. So that wakes you up. And then if you do wake up, then you learn an awful lot from that. So sorry, I've gotten off the rails here a little bit. But,
no, that's okay.
Hopefully I answered the question there.
You were talking about, and I believe in a text that you sent me about an online class you have on YouTube and how to bet properly. Is that correct?
Yeah, every single show is predicated on that. It may be showing a situational angle like I showed you guys on that graphic, and then at the end saying that, okay, this is one system. This is a starting point for you to do with it what you want. If you like the idea, if you like the system, the algorithm, then bet with your head not over it. And if you don't, then that's fine. There's another opportunity right around the corner. So every single show does have that theme. At least I try to get that in there, just to, not trying to be like the nagging parent and say, don't do this, don't do that. It's more just a reminder that, this looks really good on paper right now, but it doesn't always work out.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tybus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
The R&R podcast going to be rocking and rolling with you because football season is underway. College, Ohio State, the Power Fives, the MAC, the Browns. Michael Regai, are you ready to rock and roll with some football?
Kenny, I've been ready. This is our time of year. This is what R&R is all about. We're going to be with you every week. Kenny just said it, Browns, NFL, Ohio State centric. So you got to stay with us all fall and winter long here on R&R.
That's right. The Regai and Rhoda podcast coming to you here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe now and don't miss a show.
Talk about your site, because I was on the site, and I'll admit I'm a numbers guy, and even on the site there are a lot of numbers. Okay, when someone goes to your site, how can they go down here and make sense of a lot of the numbers? Are there certain things they should be looking for?
Yeah. One of the things I do, and we are revamping the site now to add a lot of stuff. Like there'll be access to my massive databases, which, for example, in baseball go back to 1882 by player. And we use a lot of different analytics. The word I don't like saying is artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's not the wizard behind the curtain type of thing. It's been around. Many of these techniques have been around since the 1950s and are just being augmented into better uses for sports betting. So it sounds like a big word. It makes people sound intelligent, but it doesn't mean they are. But that they'll have access to that. The other thing I look at, too, that I learned from Wall Street was market sentiment. And Warren Buffett, I think, always said it best. You take a look at a seesaw. On the right side, you have fear. On the left side, you have greed. Now, when fear on the right side gets way up in the air and is peaking, that's when you get the bottoms. Nobody wants to say they bought a stock. It's embarrassing to buy a stock. And the world is just highly negative on stocks ever going back up. Conversely, on the other side, when everything is bullish, like we've seen recently, what we see then is a correction like we're going through now. So it's interesting to me that the media is always saying the correction is underway, but the correction actually started probably 2 months prior to everybody realizing we're in a correction. So there are ways to identify those tops and bottoms much sooner than what you would hear on the news. The same thing applies to sports betting. And one of my favorite things to mention is when you hear somebody say Vegas is trying to trick us, Vegas is trying to do this, Vegas is trying to do that. They're not trying to trick us. What they're trying to do is get equal buyers and sellers on both sides of the game. Plain and simple. They're getting 10% no matter who wins the game, such as the Super Bowl. They're not trying to trick you into taking a bet so that you lose. That's just not possible, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. However, when you get like 75% of the betting tickets on a team, like you do with the 49ers so far this week playing those Cleveland Browns, it's a flag to me, and actually it would be a green flag for support of the Cleveland Browns winning this game. So I'm not suggesting people should rush out and bet anything on this. But I do think that if you're a fan of the game, I would not be surprised, based on everybody thinking that the 49ers are going to steamroll them, that lo and behold, wow, did you see that? Cleveland beat the 49ers. That happens so often, especially in college football. There's tremendous upsets. Ohio State is going to have some games coming up that are going to be very difficult for them, to just get away with a win. One of those teams that might be Penn State, for example. But that's kind of what I look for, and it's the same thing as what I learned on Wall Street.
So you brought a good segue here. Two-part question for you. One, talking about the Browns game this weekend against the 49ers and also Ohio State. I mean, do you think there's any potential chance for a Browns upset in trying to bet because of the quarterback questions in Cleveland? And that line keeps moving towards the 49ers. I think they opened as a 3-point, and some books now have them as a 6-point favorite.
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, with let's take the price of Apple Computer. Anything we know about Apple Computer, what products are selling, what products may not be selling, which I make akin to injury reports, for example, or not knowing who the quarterback's going to be, is already baked into the number. So when I look at the market, in the sports betting market, I'm assuming, I think correctly, that everything we know about injuries, everything we know about who's going to be refereeing the game, everything is baked into that number. And that's kind of how I look at that whole thing. It eliminates my need to really put any weighting on injuries, even though I look at them, into the model. The model is predicting based on situations that these teams are coming into, and situations that are against the 49ers and situations that then would benefit the Browns is what we have. And that produces the betting opportunity. So
in essence, you have a model. Have you created that computer model that takes all of this data, and then that data is weighted a certain way based upon how you see, the outcome? For instance, the Browns and the 49ers, maybe the quarterback situation is weighted differently, and you have all these different variables. They're put into a model. Is that in essence,
Yep.
where the analytical side comes from?
Yep, that is exactly right. I'll give you an example too. Is the model has college football. The pivot point in college football is 28 points. Teams that score more than 28 points, such as Ohio State, generally do extraordinarily well. They win the game. They also cover the spread most of the time at a very high rate. Oklahoma would be another team like that. So if we have a game that, say, is a total of 60 points, which a total is both teams combined are expected to score 60, and let's say the betting line is Ohio State minus 10, that implies that Ohio State is going to score 35 points in the game. That's what the market is telling us. So then what my model does, I look at that, and it'll forecast what is the probability Ohio State's going to score 35 or more points in this game. Now, sometimes it may say there's an 82% probability Ohio State will score 31 or more. Even if at 31, the market is telling us 35. So we're kind of getting the price cheaper than we normally would. But the probability and the results that when Ohio State scores a 31 or more points, they win a ton of games. They rarely lose when they score 31 or more. So then the combination of what the market's telling me and what the predictive model is saying, that there's an 82% chance they're going to score 31 or more, that's the beginning of the process of digging deeper than into the data.
And then people have access to this data that you have, your model outcome on your site, correct?
They will. What I do is I provide it now in research reports and situational trends and angles, which are on the videos, and also in written content form that I do on a wide array of websites.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Anybody that's going to bet on these two local games here, Browns and 49ers, and I just looked again, the line moved in the last hour to 6.5, which is crazy. But it's not, I don't think it's that crazy when you think about it. You don't see the line move 3.5 points in the span of like probably 48 hours very often, unless there's a devastating injury, what the Browns currently have. The advice on that, if you can give any, or your thoughts, and then also Ohio State-Purdue Saturday, John, in a game in West Lafayette where Ohio State historically has a hard time playing. I think they're favored 19.5. What do you look at that? And is there any like tips or help that you could give us or our listeners, if you don't mind?
Well, the higher that line goes is a reflection that the betting community is becoming obsessed with betting the 49ers. They're coming off the huge demolition of the Cowboys. They're beating their teams by an average of more than 10 points per game. They've won 16 of the last 17 at home as a favorite and covered 15 of them, which is insanely great. So the betting public is all over the 49ers. And with all due respect to your Browns, they're kind of flying under the radar here. They've had some troubles, a lot of little things, a lot of storylines going on, but they're still an NFL team with NFL caliber players. And that's where I think people forget at the NFL level, these guys are all good. They may be second or third stringers, but they at their college level, and they probably were state champions. These guys are very good and they come to play. So as an athlete, I look at the Cleveland Browns saying, I've heard enough of this stuff from the West Coast about how good the 49ers are. And that's the motivation then to go out and create the upset. The 49ers, if I'm on that team, wow, we just destroyed the Cowboys. And we're pretty good. We're really good. As soon as you start thinking that kind of mentality and you see it at the pro level, that's where the regression happens. So you have a team that I think is on the rise with Cleveland, a team that is ripe for a stumble on the road from the West Coast coming east. And the higher this line goes, the more I'm going to like it. I'd be surprised if it gets above 7.5. But again, I'll segue into the live betting. This is like me trading in the pits when I was in my 20s. Live betting is like my favorite thing to do. And if I could put orders in like you could in the market, like I want to buy the Cleveland Browns at this price, I would do it for just about every single game out there, because the key to live betting is you must have a plan before the game starts. You cannot, the worst thing you can do is make a bet on the Browns and then the 49ers get out to a 10-0 lead and you think, oh my God, John Ryan was so wrong. Now I'm going to hedge it. I'm going to take the 49ers because they're going to win 40-0.
Right.
You know what happens with that? You lose both of them. Cleveland comes back and you end up thinking like, oh my God, I just lost both of them. And that's, don't use live betting for hedging, period. But what you can do is you can start out, like say you bet $50 a game, or let's say 100 for example's sake. You can take 50% and bet it pre-flop. Nobody's telling you have to bet the whole amount before the game starts. And then if the 49ers do get out to that 10-0 lead, that gives you a great chance to buy the Cleveland Browns at an unbelievably cheap price, which would be probably around 11.5, 12 points. And the volatility of scoring in the NFL has never been greater. Last year, there was 32 games in which both teams had a 7 or more point lead. So much like you see in the NBA, there's these waves of scoring and then there's a response, and then it goes back and forth. Kansas City led the league in games in which they played with a 7 or more point lead, and their opponent also had a 7 or more point lead. So you got to let that work in your favor, I think, with the live betting, and just use it with pizza money. It's supposed to be fun.
Thoughts on the Ohio State game?
Well, they have Penn State on the horizon, This is a look ahead situation. I don't think Purdue has any. They don't have the depth to take them down. So I'm not too concerned about Ohio State losing the game. They might play like they did against Maryland this past week, and then in the fourth quarter wake up and win by 20. And that's another reality with sports betting, because if you were on Maryland, you were feeling pretty good in that third quarter with them being up 7.
Right.
You're thinking, oh my goodness, this is like I might as well book this. But there are things called bad beats. And Ohio State came back, and you had Maryland plus 19.5, and Ohio State won by 20.
You should have. I'm sure you probably know how that feels, but I'm sitting at a bar with a couple of buddies watching that game, and when the Ohio State scored that last touchdown to get to 17, the whole place went nuts because they didn't want. There's that, I wouldn't call it a backdoor cover. That was a front door cover right there. And then they eventually added a field goal at the end to put some cushion there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You just go into your local pub and just listen to the crowd, and like a Buffalo Wild Wings even. You can hear the tenor of what's going on. And it's not necessarily their favorite team winning the game. It's the spread is involved.
Yeah, the Ohio State Penn State game next week, which will be huge in Columbus. I don't even think the line's even out yet. I didn't see it, but that will be a very, very, very tight game.
Yeah, I expect it'll be probably Ohio State by 7.5.
Oh, you think that high?
I do. Unless Penn State's playing Massachusetts this week, so that's not going to have any effect on the betting public. But I think you are going to see the betting public on Ohio State at a pretty high percentage. So the books may opt to go to that 7.5 point level that I mentioned right away, because then it makes it easier for the Penn State backers to come in at 7.5, thinking they're getting a good line too.
Interesting. Good to know. All right.
2 more questions for you, John, and we'll let you go. First one, and I can relate to this. Does your family give you a hard time because of your analytical tendencies?
Yeah, they sometimes they do, and it's all in fun. I'm teased, especially on the losses, and I say this tongue in cheek because I know you're a meteorologist for a pretty big place, and it's more when you're wrong. That I get, you said what?
Yeah.
You said the Rams are actually going to beat the Eagles last week? What's wrong with you? This is awful. And it's more that type of thing than it is, boy, did you just see, I had Mississippi State plus 19. They just beat Alabama. That happened a couple of years ago. But it's all meant to be fun. And at the end of the day, it has to be. Otherwise, it's not worth doing. I would like to say one other thing I forgot, and I think this is like the highlight of the whole cancer trip. When I was down at Hopkins right before the stem cells went back in, I was in the process of negotiating my death with insurance carriers. And I am this is kind of my proud moment that I don't feel I have to be too humble about, because it's a pretty cool story. And I had these 3 big term policies. So they're going to be, paid, but they're also, what if I survive? It wouldn't be better to know that if I'm not going to survive, this is all in a trust fund and there's no, everything's taken care of, so to speak. So I had learned about viatical settlements. And this was very popular during the mid-'80s with the AIDS patients being able to get money out of an insurance policy based on the probabilities of their life expectancy. So I'm literally talking on the phone with these brokers, negotiating a price for them to buy my term insurance. And it never really was warped to me, because a lot of people said, oh, my God, that must have been terrible. No, but it was me playing the market. And it actually gave me something to think about other than the next round of chemo. And one of the policies, I actually got 92 cents on the dollar because I created a little bidding war. Back at this time in the early 2000s, it was everybody was searching for yield. And these type of products, if fixed income fund could get a hold of these, it was deemed as a really good thing. Now, as a portfolio of these, they probably made a lot of money. On mine, they're all expired worthless because they were term. But at the time, we were going back and forth, and it was actually fun. So as weird as that sounds, I didn't really feel like I was negotiating my death, so to speak. I was trying to get the best price possible. At the same time, I realized you guys are going to be completely wrong, because I'm going to live this thing. I'm going to beat this thing, and then you're going to have nothing. So it was a great trade. That was the best trade I ever did in my life, for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. John, what's next for you? I mean, you've been helping out a lot of people now with your website and betting responsibly and all that. And I know you want to continue to do that. Is that something that's going to be on the horizon in the long term here for you? Does it continue to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I foresee sadly, the need is going to rise. That guys like myself and I try to present it no nonsense. There's no hype here. There's no oh my goodness, this is like the game of the year type of thing, because that's teaching the wrong thing. None of us have a crystal ball. Is pretty key, because you don't make money overnight and become a millionaire sports betting. It's not meant for that. But like I've been saying all along, it's supposed to be fun. So if you're with your buddies at a bar and you think LSU is going to come back against this team, then have fun with it. Bet $5. Bet bet $1 if that adds fun to it. We don't have to be like Michael Jordan and others that have much greater wealth, and it's all relative. So they have to bet a little bit more than we would to get that same kind of enjoyment. That's not being a degenerate. But I'll leave you with this thought too: is that one of the worst mistakes anybody can make as a new gambler is to lose money on Saturday and then try to win it back Sunday, and then look at the Sunday night game as a way. All right, well, I'm not going to lose anymore. I'm going to win this one. And then try to win it all back in one fell swoop. That's a recipe for financial disaster. Granted, sometimes it's very hard, but it should be avoided. And then if you lose a Sunday night game, what do people do on Monday? They try to win it all back again on Monday, so they don't have to pay the guy on Tuesday, or explain to the spouse why they just lost $5,000. That's what you want to avoid.
Well, John, it has been a pleasure talking to you here. And I want to let everybody know you can check out your website. It's predictiveplaybook.com. And I believe you're on Twitter, John Ryan Sports 1, and on Instagram, predictive_playbook. You have videos, you have all the information that people can utilize to make, like you said, a smart bet with your head, not over it. John, it has been a tremendous pleasure for me and my brother to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I look forward to the possibility of another show. And sorry I was jumping all over the place, but I tried to get it pretty good.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure to meet you, and happy to hear that you're in the upward and successful with your battle with multiple myeloma. It's great to hear.
Yeah, and likewise for your mom too. That's tremendous news. Someday I would like to say hi to her.
Absolutely. We can arrange that.
And you can find us, Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, at Press Play Podcast. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to subscribe. If you have any suggestions for a guest, any suggestions, comments, criticisms, you know where to find us on social media. You can find me on Twitter at ScottSableFox8.
You can follow me at John_Sabol and follow the pod at Sabol Brothers on Twitter.
On behalf of my brother and John Ryan, have a great day.